Welcome to this very special edition of the KJ Masterclass Live, the show which ensures that you profit from your time spent here with experts, either through their industry insights, information, or simply learning from them. And today we have Aram Street. He is a serial entrepreneur, founder of Lex Clean, a commercial and residential cleaning services company, and the co-founder of Clean Space, a marketplace platform for on-demand cleaning. He's also a podcaster. Welcome to the show, Aram.
Hey, AJ, thanks so much for having me. This is exciting. Love live shows and been really looking forward to this. So really excited to speak to your audience, especially those in India. It's always cool to be able to talk to people on a different side of the globe. So this is really exciting. Appreciate you having me.
Absolutely. You are welcome. Welcome to the show, Aram. Welcome to India in this online form. And I'm sure not just in India, but a lot of people across the globe will benefit from what we are going to talk right now. We'll learn from you about building multiple successful businesses that you have built for yourself. In this backdrop, we will learn from, have our conversation. But before that, Aram, if you can take us through a bit about your journey, your background, so that the audience learns a bit more about who they are listening to.
For sure. Yeah. Thanks so much. So I grew up originally in Southern Indiana, the U.S., and moved to Lexington, Kentucky in 2012. And when I got here, I started working as what's called a household manager. So that's basically another term for a butler. I was working in private service for some very wealthy principals who owned a really, really large house on a horse farm. And I was basically taking care of the house, making sure housekeeping was going well, mechanical operations were, any contracting work that was getting done was happening on time. I was overseeing just the estate in general. And that was a good run. I did that for 8 years. And I actually got fired from that position for a number of reasons. It was kind of a rough end there at the tail end of that. But I knew I was going to be let go for a full year ahead of that happening. And so for the full year leading up to that, I was looking at other jobs. I was applying in that same sphere. And my wife and I, we had 4 children at the time. And at that point, we just got together and said, okay, do we want to keep working in this space? I could make a lot more money going to another position. Actually, we're looking at some in Cleveland, some in Atlanta, Georgia, looking around. And I had already been reading books by people like Robert Kiyosaki on the cash flow quadrant and things like that. And I was just, my interest in getting into the entrepreneurial system was really starting to grow. And I decided, you know what? We're not going to work for a paycheck anymore. We're going to have to try to make our own paycheck. So that's kind of what happened in 2020. April of 2020, I founded a cleaning company. And that was just because I had a lot of high-level experience in cleaning. So I could build kind of a brand around having been a butler. I was trained at an academy in Toronto, Ontario, Canada for butlering. And so I had a lot of good experience there. So I started that. During the pandemic, because that was also taking place starting off in 2020, we had a few other short-term business ventures that we were part of just because the way the economy was shaped, the way things were affected so much. We had basically a short-term run where when the schools were closed down, parents could come and drop their kids off at our house. We had a tutoring pod where we would manage their online classes, facilitate that while they're studying, make sure that they're doing their homework and those types of things. Now, that was only while the schools were shut down, but I'm running the cleaning company. We're doing online tutoring. We did other smaller short-term ventures during the pandemic because there was just a different economy then. And then last year, I co-founded Clean Space with a good friend of mine, Eric Griffin, and that's how I got into software. Eric's been doing different things in the software realm for years, had a website agency, he's built several apps, and he wanted to build an on-demand marketplace. And since I was in the cleaning sphere and he was in software, we came together. And so we're launching that now. That's a new venture for me in a new space. But I've done a smattering of things. But for the past nearly 5 years now, I have been fully self-employed. And so my tagline I tell people is that I'm thoroughly unemployable. And it's not because I'm not a good worker and I won't do great work for people. I just at some point decided I want to be the person that signs the front of the checks instead of the back of the checks. So that's where we're at.
Wonderful, wonderful. Sign in front of the checks, not at the back of the check. So you talk about, creativity and hard work in achieving success. Importance of. Tell us a bit about your experience. Why do you say so? Just hard work, and creativity. What about, ingenuity in terms of, understanding business and better? Because a lot of people work hard. A lot of people themselves in the creative field also, they are not
Sure.
earning money. Help us understand about this part, about what you say.
Yeah, so that's a great question. So creativity can mean a couple things. It can mean just being a creative, right? And having new ideas about things all the time. That's for me not necessarily been my approach. I am not personally creative. I don't know if I have a creative bone in my body in terms of thinking of something new. For me, creativity is questioning how I'm going about something, and am I always doing the most ideal strategy, or am I just doing it because that's what's most comfortable for me? So for me, creativity is thinking outside of the box in terms of my processes and my systems. So I'm a systems guy. I look at things that work and I see if I can duplicate them, right? That's my whole approach to a lot of things that I have done in business. And the things that have done the best for me, that have worked the best, have been things that have already been proven in some way, in some model, or in some application somewhere. And I've either had a mentor that's done that and has done it well and has been willing to coach me. And then they've given me basically a system that I can say, oh, cool, I can implement that. I can go and do that. Now, my wife, thankfully, she is a creative. So she's been able to help on a lot of the branding efforts, a lot of those things where I needed something created, whether it was a logo in the early days, things for marketing. So it's helpful to be married to a creative if you're not a creative, or at least have some connection there. But creativity can be more than just thinking of something. It can be always questioning what you're doing and making sure that it's the best approach, and having people beyond yourself, maybe third party, like I said, mentors or people that have come along you and can actually say, hey, Aram, AJ, this isn't the best application here. You're missing something. There's a blind spot here in what you think the market is, or how you think you're going to attract clients. So getting as many perspectives as you can from people who are qualified to talk to you is really, really helpful. And hard work is always a component. You do always want to be hardworking, but there's the phrase of working smarter, not harder. I think you could do both. I think you can work hard at working smart, and that will go a long ways. But the best way to get there is to have people that can give you insight, so it's not just coming from your own limited perspective. You're with your blinders on. So that's one helpful way to do that.
Right, Adam. So you talk about having limited financial resources. So how did that work in terms of your approach towards building your business and then businesses? Obviously,
Yeah.
What approach? How did you take that approach?
Yeah, for sure. So what that meant for me is I had limited options and things I could do. If you've got $2 million of free cash sitting in the bank, you have a lot more options. You can do a lot more things. If you don't, like I said, we had a young family. We had 4 kids when I got into entrepreneurship. We now have 5. So we had money going in a number of different ways. So we weren't exactly just me, myself, and I figuring out what to do. I had a family to work with as well. So that changes the dynamic in terms of what's available, what you can do. And one of the reasons I chose cleaning as my first business to start is because it has a low, what we'd call a barrier to entry, right? You don't have to have like a number of degrees or a lot of highly skilled experience and a lot of capital in most cases. So that was just an easy one to start. And it also resonated well with my background. So I could do something different in our space in Lexington, Kentucky, but also be able to start it not having a lot of financial resources out of the gate. So it was both a culture fit for me, but also just a logical thing, because when you're dealing with limited resources, you have to add up the numbers and see what's going to make sense. And I wasn't interested in taking out, a $40,000 loan even to try and get something started that I'd never done in before at all. I wanted to have at least some degree of experience in it. So that was sort of my justification. Now, I could have gotten a loan. I could have gone out and, gone to the bank and get a business loan. And I don't think that's a bad idea. I've helped people, make those decisions in other applications. With Clean Space, we have raised investor rounds as well. So there are multiple different approaches. But for me personally, I was just willing to look at things that I could do, that I could start, that weren't financially going to be huge, huge undertakings right out of the gate, and see if I could make that work. And then as we built that along, it gave us the ability to either start taking loans or raise funds for other businesses down the road. So there are different options there. But for us, it was just a matter of seeing what was on the table, what made the most sense at the time. And I think that this is in general, I think that this is a what would you call like a misunderstanding about the business community, at least definitely here in the US. I don't know if it's the same for you in India, but people look at starting a business, being an entrepreneur as this like lofty, far off and away thing. And it's unapproachable for a lot of people because they think you need a lot of capital or you need a serious amount of experience or you need a really, really skillful team to help you. And those are all good things. And in some things, if you're going to get into aerospace manufacturing, you probably are going to need a little bit more of that. But there are a lot of things you can do that are more approachable. And it's helping people see that even in starting something smaller in its nascent stages, you can do things and be successful at a smaller scale and build from there with more options as you grow.
Right, Aram. So, in terms of your first clients, why would somebody give you their work, especially, where you started with Lex Clean, commercial and residential cleaning services? Because you still need some USP, and people
Right.
generally want to give chance, but also don't want to give, make sure that, okay, they want to make sure that their work will get done.
That's great. Yeah. So for me, I built almost all of my original clientele just out of my network and having been in private service. So in being in private service and as a household manager, when I was working full time, I had developed a strong network of people that were in that either close to that like high net worth category or in that category. And those are people that own the companies that service the estate that I was on, things like that. So it was about seeing those clients that became my clients in LexClean. They were all just acquaintances or owners of the companies that we were using at the time. And it was important to build good relationships with them. And I had been doing that for so many years that by the time I opened a cleaning company and said, hey, we're actually going to start servicing clients, they were really ready to come along because they trusted me as an individual. So when I first started, it was strictly in residential cleaning. That's where we got our first clients in for the first year and a half or so. And then I moved into commercial cleaning about halfway through our business development. And that just came about through another good friend of mine who is a continuous improvement leader at a Kroger dairy plant. And he said, hey, come out and give us a quote for commercial cleaning. And I hadn't done a whole lot of commercial experience up to that point. So that was a new venture for us. I found out that that was a really good venture to be in at that point. But it was actually through his connection that got us in the door that led to us bidding that contract, getting it, and then we started expanding in the commercial space. So the whole key to success from the very beginning of LexClean to now has strictly been on the relationships that I built actually before I started that company. And so that's just that goes to the power of building intentional relationships, not that are just merely transactional, but things that you are doing to ensure that people believe you are a good person, you're good for your word. And if they believe that about you before you start a company, you're not having to build up that sort of rapport as a brand new business owner. So I think that everybody has an immense network, probably a much larger network than they're currently aware. And if you're going to start a company, it's going to help if you've already developed good character and trustworthiness in your day-to-day life. That's going to do a lot more for you than some special skill you might acquire after starting a business. Those are going to be important. You're going to need to develop sales skills for sure. If you haven't done that at some point, there are definitely particular things you're going to need to get good at, but it'll go a long way for you if you're really, really good at developing those connections on a personal level, even before launching a company.
Right, Adam. So through your personal connections, you can get some work for the company. But then the company has to create its own network, networking through its, image and work. How did that work? Because you can get some clients, but to keep getting continuous pipeline of, full of clients, what is the success behind reason for that success?
Yeah, that's a great question. You think so? I'm just have to tell you, I'm impressed with the way that you're approaching these questions, because it's one thing to ask a question, but to see beyond that and be like, oh, hey, how would this follow from that? I don't know if I've had that good of a question before. I love that. I think for us, again, it would depend on the company we're talking about. For LexClean in particular, the continued success there has largely been around how the company was structured, especially in core values when we launched. So there's a great book by Gino Wickman called Traction that I was recommended early on, and I took that to heart. Gino He is one of the co-founders of the EOS system, which is a great model, but Traction just basically condenses a lot of his work into one readable format. And he's going through things like what's your target market, outlining all these specifics about who your customer is, how you're going to acquire them, and also your own company. What are your core tenets? What are you going to be known for as a brand, as a representative in your space? And so for us, those were things like professionalism, personability, energy. There were several core tenets that we developed that as a representative of cleaning in Lexington, Kentucky, people were going to know these things about us, even if they never met me. But if they heard about us or had some interaction with one of our managers or an employee, they were going to know this about LexClean because we had designed the brand around these core things. So for ongoing clientele, even if it's not someone that I have spoken to or reached out to, even if it's a third or fourth level of connection, because we were intentional about designing what the company was going to be about, people could feel that and hear that and pick up on that. So it was that much easier to attract clients that we weren't necessarily reaching out to in the moment. So I think that defining your company culture, what your core tenets are going to be about, and making sure that everyone in your institution has that on lockdown is going to help you, because every person that you work with, whether it's a client or employee, they're going to say something about your business all the time, even when they're not on the clock, even when they're not purchasing your product or service, whatever it is, they're going to have something to say. And if they've had an experience either working with you or purchasing from you, then the moment that they're in a discussion with somebody about a product or service in that category, you're going to be one of the first people to think of your company, your brand. But, oh yeah, I had an experience with a cleaning company. Oh yeah, I know about an app and blah, blah, blah. And you want that, what words come out of their mouth when they start to speak about it, to be positive. You want them to have something good to say. So the best way to do that is to make sure it's not left to chance, that you haven't just thrown something out there and you're like, oh, here, we work in this service and that's all it is. Like, we do cleaning. That's the full extent of it. We don't care how we do the cleaning. We don't care how our employees represent themselves or the company. No, we actually want to think about those things, and you want to think about them before they become a topic of conversation. So that for us was how I didn't know it at the time. So it's interesting because if you'd asked me that question when I was developing that company culture and those core tenets, I wouldn't have been able to tell you, oh yeah, this is going to help us get new clients and continue to grow the company down the road. But looking back, I can tell you that's been one of our greatest successes, because we've never had a large marketing budget for LexClean. All of our sales efforts have been pretty organic for the most part. I developed a lot of our commercial clients, and I'm actually doing that still to some degree now. So I wasn't ever going to leave it up to like a large marketing budget where I was just going to dump a bunch of money in Google and just hopefully have that do all the work for us. I wanted to build it from an organic standpoint that people knew if they heard our name, they would think a good thing. I wanted it to be positively associated with people's minds. And so that's helped us in a long way from getting past the initial stages of customer acquisition.
Right, Aram. So every venture, whatever you do, will certainly have some hassles, some challenges in that process. Did you tell us a bit about your challenges? I'm sure you must have had. Secondly, did at any point in time you felt that I shouldn't have come into this line? This line was a bit, I should have waited for some more time into the job. Just want to understand your mindset as you grow.
Yeah. So I could write a book about this particular. I don't know if I have a larger degree of chaotic elements in my business life more than others, if it's the similar amount, but there's been a lot either way. So the podcast that I help co-host is called Coffee, Chaos, and Cash Flow. And a lot of what we spend talking about with guests that come on is chaos. Like, what has happened since you've gotten into entrepreneurship that has gone wrong? So I love talking about this. It's a fun thing for me. I can tell you still to this day, one of the most difficult points in terms of like really feeling like I was inadequate and I didn't know what was going on was in the early days of switching over from going from residential, which we still do residential cleaning, but we do a lot more in the commercial space now for LexClean. In the early days of commercial cleaning, the dynamic and the kind of cash flow requirements you have to have at that scale is very different than residential. And we got into commercial kind of overnight. It just kind of happened. It was a great contract, but I was unaware of how differently the cash flow needed to function in that space. You have much longer term contracts. They're for a lot longer. You're billing them 30 days after the work's been done, and then they might have a net 60 and net 90 days to pay those. So when you go from getting all of your clients paying the day of to maybe 3 or 4 months from when you've actually done the work, you still have to pay all those employees. The employees that are doing the work for you, they're not going to wait for you to pay them 4 months or 5 or 6 months down the road. And so that was a real learning experience. And in the early days of that, one of our early payrolls in commercial cleaning, it actually bounced and hadn't moved everything over. And I got a notification from the bank that the payroll bounced. And the feeling of utter just like, oh crap, what is going on? I'd never had payroll bounce before. So I didn't know what that meant. I didn't know what was going to happen there for my employees. And I just felt like I didn't know what I was doing. This is bad. Like I moved too quickly. I don't know what's going on anymore. And that's probably been one of the defining moments. I have a number of things like that, but in terms of like severity, that was a moment that I really seriously questioned if I should be doing this. And it was just like everything came together. It was a super rainy day. It had snowed earlier. So everything was like gray and slushy and cold. And so like, it was all just in one event. And I'm just sitting in my car thinking, I should probably do something else. So it was sort of a crossroads experience, if you will. And I had to decide, okay, we can either kind of tuck our tail and say, okay, this didn't work out. Like gave it a good shot, had a couple good years, but I need to hang it up, or we can figure this out. And I know now what not to do so that when this comes up down the road, what to avoid. And I thankfully went with that second option. It, again, wasn't easy. Nothing good ever, rarely is anyway. And so we figured it out. But yeah, there have been a number of events like that. And what I have come to tell people is if you're going to get into entrepreneurship, if you are a super risk averse person, this might not be for you. Unless, again, you've got money to burn and you've got a huge cushion you don't have to worry about. But if you're risk averse, this is not a risk averse enterprise. You're probably going to deal with things that you had never expected. You're going to experience emotions that you probably haven't experienced up to this point in your life. So you want to have a certain thickness of skin for coming into these things, because they will happen. Even in your best days, things will come from the side that you didn't see. And you have to have a good resiliency there. And also, like I said earlier, a good relationship with people outside of your company that can speak into that and say, yeah, you know what, this happened to me too, or something similar. It's not the end of the world. There's a great book by a guy named Todd Stottlemyre, and he talks about kind of going through the 08, 09 financial crisis when he was heavily leveraged in real estate and went from just a huge success to absolutely completely washed out, and how he rebuilt from that. And when I read people like that, their accounts, I think, as bad as I've actually not had it that bad. Like it's never been that extreme. And that gives me a lot of hope, because now I can think, well, I've not suffered. I've not lost as much as someone who's really doing well now. So if they can see it through, I'm probably going to be all right.
Absolutely. But if I understand, 2020, that's the time you started your business. Now, that was COVID. Nobody is prepared for a thing like that. And especially in your space, when residents are also, residential space is almost closed. The world is closed. The offices are closed. And till now, a lot of people are doing this remote working. A lot of offices are. How did you look at this? Was it a bad time? Did you think into this? And it was a long time. Help us understand that period that you had to see.
Yeah. So here's my take on both the pandemic and other disasters that have happened across human history. Generally, what that means is everybody is going to experience some sort of loss, right? Even if you're doing well. Like I have many friends, good, wonderful friends that I had that we actually lost to COVID-19 during that time. So it was hard for everybody in some respect. But if I look at it in terms of, as long as I am healthy and I'm still able to work, what is it that I can do in this new changing market that, again, might be temporary, it might be right now, where I can address something that's not being done well? And that that I think is an approach you have to take no matter what happens, whether it's a pandemic, whether it's a complete market change, whether it's the, and when the financial crisis came in 08 and 09, people that had capital started buying real estate because there was never a better time to buy real estate, right? So it's how you look at these things. It's like, where is the opportunity? What can I work with? Maybe it's new, maybe it's not what I expected, but where can I double down on and something that'll work? So for us in cleaning, we had such good relationships with our residential clients that we were able to work with enough safety protocols that they felt good with us being there. But on the commercial front, when we got into the commercial cleaning side, we really honed in on manufacturing and production facilities. Those were our key targets because we'd outlined that prior. So we didn't do retail. We didn't do like banks or storefronts or anything like that. And so because of that, we never lost that space. Because we were focused on manufacturing production facilities, those continued to operate because you still had to produce things to some scale, whether that's for high-level manufacturing or even for consumer goods. Those were still operating. So they had protocols in place. We still had to have all the certain, distancing, mask, all those regulations were still there, but that segment of the economy was still going. So we were focused on servicing the segment of the economy that was still operating. And it's just having that awareness of what is still working, what can we double down on. If our entire business was retail commercial and it closed everything down, that would have been a big hit for us. And if we decided, well, we only operate in that space, and since it's closed, we have to close, then that would be the end of the story. But it's just having the awareness that, look, not everything's, when something's closed down, other things are, working even more overtime now. So being able to have that awareness and look for those new opportunities helped us. Like I said, having a tutoring pod where we had, when the schools closed down, if you had two working parents, not one of them couldn't quit their job to stay home and make sure the kid was doing their online schooling, because they would lose, $80,000-$90,000 a year in income for these higher income earners. So having a tutoring pod allowed us to kind of manage the schooling for some of these parents so that they could both go to work. So we were doing things like that, again, we knew the schools weren't going to stay closed for the next decade. Like, they were eventually going to reopen. But right now, this was an opportunity where we could develop a model that was going to be unique for that time. So I think the whole thing, again, pandemic was what was happening from 20 to 23-ish. But in a few years, it'll be something else. Something else is going to happen. The world is going to change. So don't be so thrown off that you think, oh, I can't operate anymore. I've got to completely shut down. And if you do, for some reason, have to shut down, that may not be the end of your entrepreneurial journey. You may need to start something else that's unique in that particular time. So just having situational awareness will go a long way.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Now that brings me to something very important on which your business relies, that is the team. Because this is very, individual to individual connection, because your team will interact. AI cannot do this. A human has to interact with the client. How do you get a good team there? How did you get? Because one is that the team, whoever is employed, they need a job, that part. But does that actually build a team which can actually deliver results day in and day out? How do you show them a vision? What is it that you have tried to tell your team that can build, that you have been able to build an effective team? What is your secret of this particular success?
Yeah. So my secret is getting enough reading done on this topic before, so you can learn from people that know what they're doing. So a good book for that was The Culture Code by Daniel Coyle. Really, really love that book. And that taught me a lot about when you're, it's one thing when you're working for yourself and maybe you're in a space where you can do most of the work, to then having to branch out and develop a team like you're talking about, and employing people beyond yourself, because all of those people, like you mentioned, are extensions of your company in some way. So how are you going to foster a good culture there? And so for me, it was reading of people that have done that for really successful teams. And so again, because I'm not a creative and I'm not trying to come up with this myself, I want to look to people that have already succeeded and built large successful teams in some particular space and seeing how much of that I can replicate. So for me, what that meant is I needed to be at least pretty accessible to my management teams, and even a lot like, so as the team grew, if this is me, all of the employees that I'm hiring have direct access to me. And then as that grows, maybe they've got managers and there's levels, but they're always going to have a pretty easy connection to me, and depending on where you're at. So even some employees, but all the management for those employees, they're able to reach out to me directly if they need to, and continuing to foster those connections, and also being around all of the people that I've employed over the years, going and working with them, or at least checking in on them every couple of weeks or so, helped them feel that the company wasn't just some company that's far off and away that sends them a check, but actually somebody they could put a person to the company. So for me, that personable aspect was what I wanted to focus on, because it's something that's a skill set that I have. And I felt like, well, if I can't do, trips to the Bahamas once a month for all of our team members, I can at least be personable, right? So it's like figuring out, what can you do? What is available, right? So at a certain point, as your company grows, you can definitely award more, and you can spend more money on helping to elevate the lifestyles of your employees and give them a better quality of life. And that's important to do. But again, focusing on those early stages when you're not throwing, you don't have the capital to do a lot of that. It's at least being personable and being relatable and accessible to your employees will go a long way in them sticking around, right? So there were two things there. One is we're going to be relatable, be accessible, but we're also going to pay enough that they were going to be here for years instead of weeks. So we have an extremely high retention for our employees across the company, because I'm paying well above the state average for this type of work. And so people weren't coming to us making $12 an hour looking for the next job where they could make 15 or 16. We were starting them out well above that, so that they could actually come to work, have a good wage, and be able to live on that. So that's important. I just, in my industry, turnover was such a huge problem. And so it's like the number one issue for cleaning. I was like, well, why is that? And I looked at the wages and I'm like, oh, well, that's why. It's because nobody's making any money. They're only going to work for you for so long until they get something better. So it's just was being honest about that. And it's like, hey, if I want to develop a culture of people sticking around, doing good work, representing the company well, then they have to feel valued here. And the best way for them to feel value is for them to feel like they're worth their time. They're coming here making enough money for it to be worth their time. And then also to feel like somebody that employs them actually cares about them. And so that's been a huge play for us, and has helped tremendously in developing that.
Right, Aram. One of the reasons when people dream of becoming an entrepreneur is to be their own boss and to have lots of time, at least whenever they want to have time in their hands. Now, in terms of work-life balance, how do you manage it? You are a serial entrepreneur. Your wife is also an entrepreneur, if I understand, runs a very busy bakery. And then you have got 5 children. All these dynamics run very differently. Help us understand, how do you work that out?
So, okay, so this is another thing. When I was talking about, if you're risk averse, this is probably not a good thing for you to do. The work-life balance conundrum is part of this as well. If you're risk averse, or you feel like my schedule must always be 9 to 5, Monday through Friday, it's going to be really hard to be an entrepreneur, at least to start out with, right? Because for conceivably a year, if not 2 or 3 years, you are going to be doing everything at all hours, all the time. And there's just not much you're going to be able to do about it for a good while. And I at least had read enough and learned enough from other people that I understood that was going to be reality when we got started. So I don't think we were surprised, even starting businesses, married with 4 kids at the time, like, oh, wow, I didn't know it was going to be this crazy hours wise. No, it's really crazy. I tell people, you're going to get paid a lot less than you expect for working a lot more than you thought for a lot longer than you thought. So if your ideal is, oh, I'm going to make X amount on month 2, I'm going to be working, maybe 50 hours a week. It's probably going to be 60 to 80 hours a week. And you're going to make maybe half of that for about 2 years longer than you thought. And that's just the reality. So you have to just be willing to accept that. Now, you might be an outlier. Your thing might take off like a rocket and you're going to be okay. But that's the rare occurrence. It's not usually the case. And you're probably going to do a couple of different projects or pivots before you find the thing that works well. And that's part of the reason why this process takes longer than people expect. So just first of all, again, be willing to accept that that's most likely the reality, and don't be shut off by finding that to be true once you get into it. Now, for us and what we have done to help mitigate some of that craziness is we had to get to the point where on Sunday evenings, we were just mapping out the week ahead. So we kind of had to get away from, oh, this is what our quarter looks like, or this is what like. We just can't do that much time in advance. So we got to sit down week by week and look ahead. So Sunday through Saturday. Okay, this is what the week's coming up. This is what we're going to do. This is where I'm going to be. These are the meetings that I've got. These are the things that I'm doing. These are the things that I'm training for, whatever it is. These are what the kids have going on. This is when Beverly needs to be out, my wife, and developing all that. And then it's so that we're at least not surprised every day. So we don't start the day and it's like, hey, what's going on? I don't know. So we at least know week to week what's happening. But for us right now in this current phase, even especially with the startup in the software space and things that I'm doing there, we just aren't able to look that much further ahead than a week. And that didn't used to be the case. You know, when I worked 9 to 5. I worked about an even 40 hours a week. We knew what our months were. It was easy to look ahead and know what we were doing. But when you're an entrepreneur, you have to be willing to go from that steady, predictable schedule to this is how it's going to look. It might be day by day for you. I don't know. But just be willing to look and say, hey, I know this much time ahead. Okay, that's what I've got to work with. That's what I can control. And then sit down, if you're married or whatever the situation is, whoever that other person is, if it's just you, it's easy. You don't even necessarily have to do this, but I think it's still a good practice, even if you are single, because you at least you're mentally aware of what's coming up and what's going on. It's just probably going to be a shorter time frame than what you're used to in a job.
Right. You know, Aram. So much to learn from you, from your life, from your entrepreneurship, multiple businesses, and also to learn from your podcast, Coffee, Chaos, and Cash Flow. Tell us a bit about this.
So look, it's so funny. I asked people told me, I was like, if I had a list of 100 things I don't want to do anytime soon, starting a podcast would have been like really far up near the top. And part of the reason we went and did it is because my good friends, Eric, who's the co-founder in Clean Space, and then my good friend Yemi, who's worked with us on several projects on multiple companies, they were willing to co-host. And I was like, okay, well, if I'm not going to run everything myself, then at least it'll help kind of split things up. So it ended up just being a good arrangement. And Eric has such an interesting business background in e-commerce and other things that he's done. Yemi's got such a varied experience that we thought it would be cool to talk about various business topics that we have dealt with personally, because we all have a unique perspective. And so that was kind of, we're very early in our first season of episodes. And so we've handled just various business topics, usually 15 to 20 minutes long. So it's not a super, deep dive, 3-hour, Joe Rogan type of expose. It's pretty light, and we try to keep it, entertaining. So it's just general business topics. And then we'll bring people in, like I said, guests to talk about their experiences, their chaotic moments. But it just kind of came about somewhat organically. I had a few people that were saying, hey, you guys should start a podcast. And since I was able to get some help co-hosting, it just made sense at the time. But yeah, so it's been fun. I've learned a lot there. I've got to meet some really great people. Meeting you, this came about because I'm on a platform looking for potential guests and other appearances, and I wouldn't have done that. I wouldn't be talking to you right now if we hadn't launched the podcast. So it's worked out great all around.
Wonderful. As I said, there is so much to learn from you, and I'm sure a lot of people would want to learn from you, learn more about you, about your companies, connect with you, be your client. What's the best way for them to do so?
LinkedIn is probably the best way. I'm on LinkedIn probably the most. So you can find me at Aram Street. There aren't too many of us on there with that name. So it's pretty easy to find. Yeah, if you can find an Aram Street in Lexington, Kentucky, it's very likely me. So that's the best way. That's where I do most of my engagement. So that'd be a great place to find me.
Wonderful. With this, it's a wrap on this very special edition of the KJ Masterclass Live. Thank you so much indeed for joining us.
AJ, thank you. I appreciate being here.